whom he apparently regards as one of the earliest Englishmen to trace the presence of Arabic learning in medieval England. Gerard Langbaine, as Burnett reveals, and I quote, compiled material from the Bodleian and other libraries in Oxford to illustrate the history of the study of Arabic in England. End quote. In what is merely a notebook, Langbaine analyzes this subject by examining the work of some nowadays well-known authors, Adelard of Bath, Plato of Tivoli, Robert the Englishman, and Robert of Ketton, whom he regards the same as the former. We will talk about this. Roger Bacon and Daniel of Morley. The main point of interest here is the fact that all these authors, as it may be expected, became related to some degree either with the knowledge produced in al-Andalus or with the region itself. Bearing that in mind, in this paper we will briefly examine the role that al-Andalus played in transmitting the Arabic science to Britain through two 12th century authors named by Langbaine, Adelard of Bath and Daniel of Morley, and another not considered by him, that is Robert of Chester. This will be done by determining to which degree were they related to the Iberian Peninsula. So we will discuss this, determining to which degree were they related with the Iberian Peninsula, which were the elements that they received, and to which degree were these elements transmitted. Our selection of authors is limited by time but also by space, as we will be focusing on those who worked in the 12th century, but mostly on those who left Britain to pursue the Arabic sciences and then came back to the island to disseminate this knowledge. This is precisely the common trait between our three authors. As Burnett tells us in the article about Robert of Chester for the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, and I quote, Robert of Chester's career is familiar, like Adelard of Bath, Alfred of Churchill, and Daniel of Morley. He went abroad to study, but then returned to England to put the fruits of his research at the disposal of his fellow citizens. Let us firstly examine each case on its own, and afterwards we will summarize and compare them quite briefly, I think. So, I probably will stop reading here because if I read all this, I won't have time. I'm not really sure to which extent do you know Adelard of Bath. He's, I think, quite well known. As you can see, he was one of the first Arabic Latin translators to work in the 12th century. He translated at least 4 works from Arabic into Latin. That is Euclid's Elements, Abu Ma'shar abbreviation to the introduction of astrology, the Liber Prestigiorum, the name he gave to the book of Talismans by Thabit ben Qurra, and the revision of the astronomical tables by al-Khwarizmi. And he also was the author of several original works, the most famous of which are the Questiones Naturales, the De Odem et Diverso, and the Opere Astrolapsus. Well, it's worth noting that aside from his scholarly activity, Adelard was no minor character at his time. Burnett has suggested that Adelard could have spent, and I quote, could have spent his life as a tutor to the sons of the nobility, and perhaps even as a philosophus in the court. And this author, Charles Burnett, has also argued that Adelard may even have been involved, probably in the last period of his life, in the early education of Henry Plantagenet, the future Henry II of England, to whom he dedicated his De Opere Astrolapsus in early 1150. So, Adelard probably was the one translator that traveled the most. He, as we can see, probably studied in Tours, taught in Laon, and visited Magna Graecia, Sicily, and the Principality of Antioch. This is around the Cilicia in what today is southern Turkey and northern Syria. And as he tells us in the Cuestiones Naturales, he made a 7-year journey to the Middle East to investigate, to pursue what he calls the Arabum Studia. And afterwards, he came back to Britain, and most probably he studied with Petrus Alfonsi, who, as you may know, was also one of the first Europeans to translate from. Well, we know about his name. There was some translations, some anonymous translations before, but he's like one of the first. So here arises the question of where could Adelard have learned Arabic. He could, of course, have entered in contact with Arabic learning in southern Italy and in Sicily, but the most probable assumption is that he could have learned the language during his trip to the Middle East. For he speaks about his Arabic teachers, if we want to take the phrase a magistris arabicis at face value. Also, it has long been questioned whether Adelard visited the Iberian Peninsula. Most probably he didn't. However, there are no testimonies of Adelard's presence there. We do have, however, of notices of the relation he probably had with the knowledge produced in Hispania, mostly through Petrus Alfonsi. Just to give a quick note about Petrus Alfonsi, says Burnett, and I quote, was educated in an Arabic milieu in Huesca, then part of the Muslim kingdom of Zaragoza, and in 1106, 10 years after the city's conquest by the Christians, he was baptized. We have to remember that in Zaragoza was ruled by the Banu Hud, and as we know, the Banu Hud had a quite large, well, I don't know how large, but it seems a library in Zaragoza, and after they were overthrown, this Arabic library was moved to Rueda de Jalón, and afterwards it seems that these books were taken to Toledo. So, like, Zaragoza was a prosperous place to study Arabic knowledge. We know that Ibn Baja worked there, and well, it's good to remind us that. So, the evidence of Petrus' relation with Adelard comes from two extant versions of the Zich Asin Hind, that is, the astronomical tables of al-Khwarizmi. Petrus Alfonsi, as we know, translated, or rather adapted, around 1116, the Zij, as it had been reworked in al-Andalus by Maslama al-Majriti. We have to remember that al-Majriti means from Madrid, so this was all done in al-Andalus. This translation that Petrus Alfonsi made was made in Britain with the help of a student, and I quote, a student skilled in Latin, who most probably was, as Burnett assumes, Walher of Malvern. This was a first translation of the Zich that was made in England. Afterwards, they made another translation, and I'll read. The second one was the one by Adelard, Esig el Cauresmi per Atelardum Batoniensem ex Arabico sumptus. As Burnett tells us, in the two manuscripts that survive, chapters have been added to the canons from a version of the same tables of al-Khwarizmi made by Adelard. So Petrus went to Britain. There he made two translations of apparently he made two translations of the astronomical tables by al-Khwarizmi. One of those was made by Petrus and by Walher of Malvern, and the other one probably was made by Adelard. Burnett, it's a conclusion by Burnett, and I quote: "The most economical explanation for the two Latin versions of the tables is that Petrus had a manuscript of the tables and taught both Walcher and Adelard in the West Midlands of England." So that's the thing with Petrus Alfonsi. I think I will now go to I wanted to speak about Adelard's Arabic knowledge, because, well, he has this particularity that he retained in his translations Arabic terminology and some phrases, as some authors, particularly Burnett, suggest. These are quite unusual, because they seem to be like annotations made for an Arabic reader. So I have an example here. This is from the astronomical tables of Al-Khwarizmi, I think. Yeah, and as you can see, that's the text as it appears in the manuscript, and there's the Arabic, the original. كل الأحوال كمثل الهلال في كمال ونقضان. And the translation by Burnett: all the states are like those of the moon in its fullness and waning. And there's another. كل الكواكب قمنا في أشرافها إلا عطارد حين أنشئ آدم. So we may note that there says قمنا. I think it would be قامت, because قمنا it's plural for female plural, so there's a mistake. But about this, Burnett tells us both these verses show some influence of Spanish Arabic because of this phenomenon called al-imala, which is the tendency towards narrowing the long A to E. And we can see that in the transcription made from in Latin. I will move now to Robert of Chester, because I will run out of time. Robert of Chester is, just to summarize, well, you can see right there, he's frequently identified with Robert of Ketton. Robert of Ketton is famous for being the first Latin translator of the Quran. And he also made an Arabic translation of the Elements, and, well, he worked in this project by Petrus Venerabilis, which we now call the Corpus Islamo-Latinum, named that has been popularized by the researchers of this same institution, the Dr. Jose Martinez Gasquez and Oscar de la Cruz Palma, Candida Ferrero Hernandez, and so forth. So, of Robert of Chester, we have notably more lesser information. He appears in Segovia in 1145, and then in London in 1147. Just let me talk about. So, I will read this. On the other hand, we know that Robert of Chester translated the algebra of Al-Khwarizmi in Segovia in 1145, then wrote a treatise on the astrolabe in London in 1147, afterwards composed, either in 1150 or in 1170, astronomical tables for the meridian of London, based in turn in some astronomical tables based on the meridian of Toledo. And he probably drew a set of political horoscopes for 1150 and 1151 in the court of King Stephen. The proof of his reception of, both Robert of Chester and Daniel of Morley are already early examples of Adelard's reception in the same Britain. The proof of the reception of Robert of Chester's of Adelard comes from the fact that Robert was the author of a revision of Adelard of Bath's version of the astronomical tables of Al-Khwarizmi of an unknown date. So I will just go quickly to Daniel of Morley. I knew this was going to happen. So Daniel of Morley has been known since, well, mostly he was made popular by Valentin Rose in the 19th century because Rose used him to support his theory about the translating activity we had in Toledo. Daniel of Morley writes, he states at the beginning of his Philosophia, or De Naturis Inferiorum et Superiorum, that he visited Toledo while Gerard of Cremona taught there, and then came back at the request of his friends. He says that he came back with lots of books, even though he states that he met Gerard, his sources are not Gerard's translations, but Adelard's works and translations by John of Seville, Herman of Carinthia, and Dominicus Gundisalinus. All these translators, as we know, worked here in Hispania. John of Seville and Herman of Carinthia worked like near the Ebro Valley, and Dominicus Gundisalinus was a very, very well-known translator of the so-called School of Translators of Toledo. And we can see Daniel of Morley, as we can see here, models his text on the Cuestiones Naturales and the Opera Astrolapsus of Adelard. In his Philosophia, he speaks about an encounter he had with Gerard of Cremona, but it has been proved that this conversation he had with Gerard is based on the conversation that Adelard has supposedly with his nephew in the Cuestiones Naturales. So just to finish, I wanted to write just a few things so you could read, because sometimes the letter is too small. So, what happened? The three of them left Britain and came to the Iberian Peninsula. Well, not the three of them, just Robert of Chester and Daniel of Morley stayed to have been in the Iberian Peninsula. Adelard, as we suppose, he didn't visit the peninsula, but he most probably learned or perfected his Arabic knowledge with Petrus Alfonsi. So we can see that the three of them had some degree of relation with the Iberian Peninsula. What did they get? They get well, either knowledge of or manuscripts. It seems like obvious, but it's not that so. We could, for instance, even though Adelard wasn't in the Iberian Peninsula as we suppose, he got this knowledge, or he perfected this Arabic knowledge with Petrus Alfonsi. Some of the Arabic knowledge that he shows signs of the Arabic Spanish dialect. So he also got this from here, and he also translated the Elements, this work by Abu Ma'shar. And the thing with Abu Ma'shar, for instance, is that also here in the Iberian Peninsula was made Adelard translated the abbreviation to the astrology, and Herman of Carinthia here in the peninsula worked the great introduction to astrology, I think it's called, and it seems that Herman knew the translation by Adelard. And, well, most probably also Robert of Chester learned some of his Arabic here in the peninsula, but he states that he's not that good of a translator. And then he came back to England. He went back to England to like disseminate his knowledge. And, well, just to finish. They seem to be to have been transmitted from very early on. For instance, we have, I think, 4 manuscripts of the Philosophia of Daniel of Morley. One is dated in the 12th century already, and the other 2 are dated in the first decades of the 13th century. Well, I don't really let me just well, I think that's it.